I'm Ethan, 35, male, and after being kicked out at 17 with just $12 and a trash bag, my family now wants to live in the $750,000 home I built after 18 years of complete silence. The past isn't just a different country. For me, it's a locked room in a house that burned down. I spent nearly 2 decades convincing myself I'd lost the key, that the contents of that room no longer mattered. But the past has a funny way of picking locks. All it took was one phone call to make the smell of smoke feel real again, to make me feel the heat at my back. My wife, Olivia, found me standing in the kitchen, staring at the phone on our quartz countertop as if it were a venomous snake. She slid her arms around my waist from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. "You have that look," she murmured. "The one you get when you're mentally re-engineering the support beams of the entire house." I forced a weak smile, turning to face her. Olivia is my anchor. With her warm eyes and a smile that could disarm armies, she is the architect of my peace, while I am the architect of our home. Literally. We were standing in the heart of the house I had designed, a place of light, clean lines, and open spaces, everything my childhood home was not. "It was my mother," I said. The words felt foreign, like a language I hadn't spoken in 18 years. Olivia's smile vanished, replaced by a look of fierce concern. "After all this time, is everything okay?" "I don't know what it is," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "But it's not okay. To understand the weight of that phone call, you have to understand the family I came from. My father, Richard, was a man carved from granite and disappointment. He ran a small construction business with a heavy hand and a heavier sigh. My older brother, Kevin, was his carbon copy, 2 years my senior and 100 years older in spirit. He was the golden child, not because he was brilliant or kind, but because he was practical. He was happy to swing a hammer, to follow in my father's dusty footsteps without a single question. And then there was me, the dreamer. The boy who didn't see lumber and drywall, but saw lines, forms, and possibilities. While Kevin was learning to frame a wall, I was in my room, sketching buildings on any scrap of paper I could find. My passion was a deep, personal offense to my father and brother. It was frivolous, unmanly, and a waste of God-given hands that could be doing real work. I remember one Saturday afternoon when I was 15. I had spent a month building a detailed scale model of a cantilever house I'd designed. It was my masterpiece, made from balsa wood and sheer determination. I brought it to the living room to show them, my heart thumping with a desperate need for a single word of approval. My father glanced at it, his lip curling. "What's this nonsense?" "It's a house, Dad. See how the second floor is balanced. It's all about load-bearing cores," and before I could finish, Kevin walked by and intentionally knocked the corner of it with his hip. The delicate structure, my month of careful work, tumbled to the floor and shattered into a dozen pieces. Kevin just laughed. "Looks like your load-bearing core wasn't so tough after all, eh, Ethan?" I looked at my father, my eyes pleading. He just shrugged. "He has a point. It's a flimsy thing. Now clean this mess up before your mother sees it." That was the dynamic. My mother, Brenda, wasn't much different. She worshipped practicality and appearances. To her, Kevin, who had grease under his fingernails and a guaranteed job with his father, was a success story in the making. I, with my ink-stained fingers and dreams of going to architecture school, was a social embarrassment. "What will I tell the neighbors?" she'd ask. "That my son wants to go off and draw pictures for a living." The final break happened when I was 17. College application season was in full swing. My parents had made their decree. I was not going to college. I was to start as a full-time apprentice at my father's company the Monday after my high school graduation. It wasn't a discussion, it was a verdict. I defied them. I secretly filled out one application to the best public university in the state with a renowned architecture program. When the acceptance letter arrived, I made the mistake of leaving it on my desk. My mother found it. The eruption was biblical. "You went behind our backs," she shrieked, waving the letter in my face. My father stood behind her, his arms crossed, his face a thundercloud. "I told you, no more of this art school foolishness. You'll work with me and your brother, you'll do real work." "Designing buildings is real work," I argued, my voice cracking with teenage desperation. "It's what I'm good at. It's all I want to do." Kevin, standing in the doorway with a smirk, delivered the final blow. "Let him go, Dad. We don't need a dreamer who's afraid to get his hands dirty. The business will be better off." That was all my father needed to hear. The look in his eyes turned from anger to ice. "He's right," he said to my mother. If he thinks he's too good for this family, then he can go be an architect on his own. My mother, with a chilling efficiency, went into my room, pulled a black trash bag from the closet, and started sweeping my belongings into it. My sketches, my books, my clothes, all of it shoved into a plastic sack. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the front porch. The door slammed shut. Through the window, I saw my father turn his back. My mother closed the curtains. Kevin was already gone. I was alone. A few moments later, the porch light flicked on, and I saw my father's hand slip a folded bill under the door. I picked it up. It was $12. I stood there for a long time, holding a trash bag and $12, the entire sum of my 17 years of life. Then, I turned around and started walking. I never looked back. The 18 years that followed were a blur of grit and concrete. Not the kind my father worked with, but the unyielding pavement of reality I had to navigate alone. The first few nights were spent in a bus station. The $12 bought me a few hot dogs and a coffee to stay warm. I found a job washing dishes at an all-night diner, trading my labor for greasy food and a safe place to be after hours. The owner, a gruff but kind man named Al, let me sleep in a back booth after we closed. That trash bag of belongings was my life. I enrolled in a community college, paying for it one credit at a time with money saved from the diner, and a second job I took stocking shelves at a grocery store. I was perpetually exhausted, fueled by cheap coffee and a burning, all-consuming need to prove them wrong. Failure wasn't an option. Going back was unthinkable. I met Olivia in a university library. I had finally transferred to the 4-year program I dreamed of, though my journey there was much harder than I'd imagined. She was studying for a finance exam, surrounded by a mountain of books, looking just as tired and determined as I felt. We started with a shared sigh of exhaustion and a conversation over lukewarm vending machine coffee. She told me about her dream of being a financial analyst. I told her about my dream of designing buildings that felt like home. I didn't tell her about my family, not then. The wound was too fresh, the shame too heavy. We became inseparable. We were a team, pushing each other, celebrating every small victory. When I graduated, she was the one cheering the loudest in the audience. When she landed her first job at a major firm, I was the one who took her out to the fanciest dinner we could afford, which was a step up from pizza. I told her my full story about a year into our relationship. We were sitting in my tiny, cramped apartment, and she asked why I never talked about my family. So I told her. I told her about the broken model, the constant belittling, the trash bag, and the $12. When I finished, I expected pity or maybe even disbelief. Instead, she took my hand, her eyes filled not with pity but with a profound, unwavering respect. "You didn't just build a life, Ethan," she said softly. "You built yourself." From that day on, she became my family. Her parents, a warm and loving couple from Ohio, welcomed me with open arms, asking about my designs with genuine interest and treating me like the son they never had. For the first time, I understood what a family was supposed to feel like. My career started slowly. I took small jobs, designing kitchen extensions and garage conversions, but I poured my soul into every project. My reputation grew. I started my own small firm. Olivia's career soared, her sharp mind for numbers providing us with the stability I needed to take risks. We saved, we invested, and we planned. Our biggest plan was for our own home. It was our grand project, a culmination of everything we had worked for. I spent a year on the design, a modern but warm structure nestled on a wooded plot of land, an hour outside the city. It was everything I had ever dreamed of: soaring ceilings, massive windows that flooded the rooms with light, and a sense of peace that felt sacred. Olivia managed the finances, and I managed the construction, hiring a crew but doing much of the detail work myself. It was the only time I enjoyed working with my hands in that way, because I was building our future, not my father's. We moved in 6 months ago. The house, valued at around $750,000, was more than just a property. It was a monument to our partnership, a fortress of solitude built against the memories of a lonely past. And then the phone rang. It was my mother, Brenda. Her voice, thin and reedy, was a ghost from another life. "Ethan, is that you?" she asked, as if there were any doubt. "Yes," I said, my throat tight. "Oh, Ethan, it's your mother." There was a pause, thick with 18 years of unspoken words. "It's been too long." The conversation was a masterpiece of awkwardness. She asked stilted questions about my life, feigning interest. I gave her short, noncommittal answers. I could hear other voices in the background, my father's gruff mumble, my brother's impatient tone. This wasn't a casual catch-up call. It was an ambush. After 5 minutes of painful small talk, she finally got to the point. Her tone shifted, losing its false sweetness and taking on a note of rehearsed gravity. Ethan, the real reason I'm calling is, well, things have been difficult here. Your father's health isn't what it used to be, and the business, it's gone. I stayed silent. We need to talk, she said, her voice dropping. We need to talk about our living situation. The line went quiet, but the silence was deafening. It was the silence of expectation, the silence of a demand masquerading as a plea. In that moment, I knew. The past wasn't just knocking on my door, it was getting ready to kick it down. My mind was a blank slate. I couldn't form a word. I just stood there, holding the phone to my ear, listening to the faint sound of my mother's breathing on the other end. My beautiful, sunlit kitchen felt suddenly cold and unfamiliar. Ethan, are you there? Brenda's voice sharpened with impatience. I'm here, I managed to say. The words felt like gravel in my mouth. She took my response as an invitation to unload the full weight of their self-inflicted tragedy. She painted a bleak picture of the last decade and a half. The construction business, which had once been their bastion of pride, had crumbled. It started with the 2008 financial crisis, a blow from which my father's old-fashioned business model never recovered. He had refused to adapt, to modernize. Then, Kevin had taken over more of the operations, and according to my mother's carefully worded complaints, his bad luck and a series of unfortunate deals had driven the final nails into the coffin. Your father's back is shot, she continued, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. He can't work anymore, and Kevin, well, he tried his best. We lost the house, Ethan. The bank took it last month. We're staying with your aunt, but it's just temporary. It's so cramped you wouldn't believe it. I still said nothing. I was a statue, frozen by the sheer audacity of it all. They had lost the house I grew up in, the house they had chosen over me. A bitter, ironic laugh threatened to bubble up, but I choked it down. Then came the pivot. The calculated shift from sob story to solution. Their solution. A cousin of ours saw some pictures on the internet, Brenda said, her voice brightening with a false, airy tone. She said you built a new house, a big one. She said it's absolutely beautiful. My blood ran cold. My house, my sanctuary. They were talking about my home. It's just we saw the pictures, Ethan, she went on, her voice now oozing with a grotesque sense of entitlement. It's so big, you have all that space, and we're your family. There it was. The word she hadn't earned the right to use in 18 years. Family. Before I could process that, she delivered the final, stunning blow. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. So, we'll be moving in with you. It's the only sensible thing to do. Richard and I can take that lovely guest suite I saw in the photos, the one with the big window overlooking the garden. And there's a guest house, isn't there? The cousin said there was. Kevin and his family can stay there. It will just be until we get back on our feet, of course. I was physically unable to speak. My jaw was locked, my throat constricted. It felt like the air had been vacuumed from the room. They had not only decided they were moving in, but they had already assigned themselves rooms based on photos they'd seen online. The violation was so profound, so absolute, that my brain simply shut down. As if sensing my stunned silence, I heard my father's voice boom in the background, muffled but clear. Tell him it's the least he can do. We put a roof over his head for 17 years. Then, Kevin's voice, dripping with the same old condescending spite. Yeah, tell Mr. Fancy Architect it's time he paid his dues. My mother came back on the line. The boys are here. We're all in agreement. This is for the best. It'll be wonderful, Ethan. We can finally be a family again. A family again. The phrase was a slap in the face. We were never a family. We were a warden and 2 guards living with a prisoner who finally escaped. We'll give you a day to, get things ready, Brenda said, as if she were doing me a favor by granting me a 24-hour notice before her occupation began. I'll call you back tomorrow afternoon to work out the logistics of the move. We can probably be there by the weekend. Talk to you then, sweetie. Click, she hung up. I stood there, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I slowly lowered the phone and placed it back on the counter. My hands were shaking. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They weren't just asking for a handout. They were claiming my life's work as their own. They had thrown me out with a trash bag and $12, and now they were coming back to claim the castle I had built on the ashes of that abandonment. The betrayal was so immense, it was surreal. It was a violation of the past, the present, and the future, all in a single 5-minute phone call. For a long time, I didn't move. The sun streamed through the large window over the sink, the same window my mother had praised, and I felt a desperate urge to pull the shades down, to plunge the house into darkness and hide. The silence of our home, usually a source of comfort, now felt heavy with their impending arrival. Olivia found me exactly where she'd left me, but my posture had changed. I was hunched over the counter, my head in my hands, the picture of defeat. "Ethan, what is it? What did she say?" she asked, her voice soft with worry. I lifted my head and looked at her. I'm not sure what she saw in my eyes, shock, rage, a deep, ancient hurt, but her expression shifted to one of alarm. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come out right. I just stammered, trying to piece together the unbelievable arrogance of their demand. They want to move in," I finally choked out. "All of them, my mother, my father, and Kevin, here in our house." Olivia blinked, processing my words. "Move in like for a visit?" "No," I said, shaking my head as the full absurdity of it washed over me again. "Not a visit. To live here. They told me they were moving in. They've already picked out their rooms. Mom and Dad in the guest suite, Kevin in the guest house. They're planning to be here by the weekend." Olivia stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. For a moment, she was as speechless as I had been. Then, a fire ignited in her eyes that I had rarely seen before. It was the look of a protector, a lioness defending her territory. "Absolutely not," she said. The two words were spoken with the force and finality of a gavel striking wood. There was no hesitation, no room for debate. "No, not in a million years." Her immediate, unwavering certainty was the lifeline I needed. It cut through my shock and pulled me back to the surface. "They think I owe them," I said, the words spilling out now. "They said it's my duty, that they gave me a roof for 17 years. They called me Mr. Fancy Architect. They think this house, is their retirement plan. Their backup." "This house," Olivia said, stepping forward and taking my trembling hands in hers, her grip firm and steady. "This house is the one you sketched on napkins in that tiny apartment when you were living on instant noodles. This house is what we saved for penny by penny, while your family ignored your existence for 18 years. This house has nothing to do with them. You have nothing to do with them." She was right. Every word was a bulwark against the tide of guilt and obligation they were trying to drown me in. She led me over to the living room sofa and sat me down. She didn't press me for more details. She just sat with me, a silent, powerful presence, giving me the space to process the emotional hurricane that had just torn through my carefully constructed piece. I thought about the 17-year-old boy on the porch, the shame of holding that trash bag, the cold terror of having nowhere to go, the gnawing loneliness of the holidays spent working double shifts at the diner. I had buried that boy under layers of success and adult responsibility, but he was still there. And my family, with their one phone call, had just reminded him of how disposable he was to them. But as the initial shock subsided, something else began to surface, a cold, hard anger. How dare they? How dare they try to erase 18 years of silence and cruelty with a demand for shelter? The audacity was breathtaking. And with that anger came a strange sense of clarity. For the first time, I wasn't the powerless teenager. I was a grown man, I had the power. They needed me. A feeling of grim validation settled in my chest. All those years, their silence had been a weapon, a way of telling me I didn't matter. But now, that silence was broken, and it was because they were desperate. The successful life I had built, the very life they had mocked and dismissed, was now the one thing they wanted a piece of. "What are you going to do?" Olivia asked gently after a long silence. I looked at her, my resolve hardening. "I'm not going to argue with them over the phone. I'm not going to let them yell or guilt-trip me from a distance." I took a deep breath. "We're going to meet them, in person." Olivia looked surprised. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "I have to," I said, the certainty growing stronger in my voice. "I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for me, for the kid they threw out. He deserves to see me say no to their faces. He deserves to see that he was right all along." Olivia studied my face, then nodded slowly, a small, proud smile touching her lips. "Okay," she said. "Then that's what we'll do." Together, I called my mother back. She answered on the first ring, her voice sickeningly cheerful. "Ethan, I was just about to make a list. Do you have decent pans, or should I bring my cast iron skillet?" "Stop," I said, my voice flat and cold. We're not discussing pans, we're not moving you in, we need to talk, all of us face to face. The silence on her end was telling, this wasn't part of her plan. We'll meet you halfway, I continued. There's a coffee shop in Middleton. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. if you want to talk, you'll be there. I didn't wait for a reply, I hung up. I looked at Olivia, who gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. The decision was made. The confrontation was set. For the first time in 18 years, I was going to face my past, not as a victim, but as the architect of my own life. The town of Middleton was a drab, generic halfway point, a place you passed through on the way to somewhere better. The coffee shop, the daily grind, was equally unremarkable, with beige walls and the faint, sad smell of burnt coffee. It was the perfect, sterile environment for the meeting I was about to have. It was a place with no memories, a neutral battlefield. Olivia and I arrived 10 minutes early. We chose a booth in the back corner, giving us a clear view of the entrance. I ordered a black coffee I didn't want, just to have something to hold. My hands were steady, but a low-frequency hum of anxiety vibrated through my entire body. Olivia put her hand over mine on the table. "You've got this," she whispered. "Remember why you're here." I was here for the 17-year-old boy, to give him a voice he never had. At precisely 10 o'clock, the bell above the shop door jingled. They entered as a unit, a phalanx of resentment. My mother, Brenda, was first, her face set in a look of strained pleasantry. My father, Richard, followed, leaning heavily on a cane, his face paler and more lined than I remembered. He looked smaller, diminished. Finally, there was Kevin, his arms crossed, a familiar scowl etched onto his face. He hadn't changed at all. They looked worn, frayed at the edges, their clothes clean but dated. The years had not been kind. They spotted us and made their way over. The air grew thick with tension. "Ethan," my mother said, forcing a bright, brittle smile. "And this must be Olivia. It's so lovely to finally meet you." Olivia nodded politely but didn't offer her hand. "Brenda, Richard, Kevin." They slid into the opposite side of the booth, a silent, accusing panel of judges. A waitress came over, and they ordered coffees with a flurry of complicated instructions, a small performance of control in a situation where they had none. Once the waitress left, an awkward silence descended. My mother, ever the director, decided to break it. "Well," she began, clapping her hands together softly. "This is nice. Getting together. We were just so excited after our call. We've already started packing a few boxes of keepsakes." She looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to affirm her plans. My father grunted in agreement, staring at the table. Kevin just glowered, radiating impatience. This was it, the moment of truth. I took a slow breath, letting the stale coffee shop air fill my lungs. I looked at each of them in turn, making eye contact. Brenda's fake smile faltered under my direct gaze. My father shifted uncomfortably. Kevin just narrowed his eyes. "We're not here to discuss packing," I said, my voice calm and even. It was a voice I didn't know I possessed, devoid of the pleading tremor of my youth. "We're here to be clear. There seems to have been a fundamental misunderstanding." Brenda's smile vanished completely. "A misunderstanding? What are you talking about? I was very clear." "Oh, you were," I agreed, nodding slowly. "You were perfectly clear. You told me that after 18 years of absolute silence, you have decided that you are all moving into my house." "It's the right thing to do," my father mumbled, his first words. "Family helps family." "That's an interesting word, family," I said, leaning forward slightly. Olivia's hand tightened on mine under the table, a silent surge of strength. "I want to talk about the last time we were all together as a family. Do you remember it?" They stared at me, confused. "I do," I continued, my voice never rising. "I remember it perfectly. It was a Tuesday evening. I was 17. And you," I looked directly at my mother, packed my belongings into a black plastic trash bag because I had been accepted to architecture school. My mother flinched as if I'd struck her. "And you," I turned to my father, "told me not to come back until I grew up. You slammed the door and turned your back." My father's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "And you," I said, my eyes locking with Kevin's, "told our father that the family business would be better off without a dreamer. You were smiling when I walked out the door." Kevin's scowl deepened. "You were an arrogant kid who needed to be taught a lesson." "A lesson in what?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Homelessness, hunger, what was the lesson exactly? I was a child, your son, your brother. And you threw me away like I was nothing." I let the words hang in the air. The bustling noise of the coffee shop seemed to fade away. "For 18 years," I went on, I did not hear a single word from any of you, not a phone call, not a birthday card, not an email. Not once did you try to find out if I was alive or dead. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school. I accumulated debt. I struggled. I built a life, brick by brick, from nothing. From the $12 you slipped under the door, Dad, that was my inheritance, a trash bag and $12. Tears were now welling in my mother's eyes. They were tears of frustration, not remorse. We had our own lives to worry about, she whispered. It was hard for us too. The sheer selfishness of that statement was staggering. It was the final piece of confirmation I needed. I looked at these 3 people who shared my DNA, and I felt nothing but a profound, empty distance. The hurt was gone, replaced by a cold, hard peace. They were strangers. The waitress returned with their coffees, placing them carefully on the table. The interruption did nothing to break the tension. It only amplified the suffocating silence that followed. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, a piece of theater for an audience of one. My father stared into his cup as if it held the answers to the universe. Kevin just looked like he wanted to flip the table. They were waiting for me to soften, to bend to the weight of their manufactured sorrow. It was a tactic that might have worked on the 17-year-old boy who was desperate for their love. But it had no effect on the man sitting before them. You didn't call me to see if I was okay, I said, picking up where I left off. My voice was as steady as a foundation wall. You didn't call me to apologize. You didn't even call me to ask for help. You called me to inform me that you would be taking over my home. The home I designed. The home my wife and I built together. A symbol of the life I created, not just without you, but because of you. I paused, letting the truth of that statement settle. Being thrown out was the best thing that ever happened to me. It set me free. It forced me to become the man I am today, a man who doesn't need your approval. How can you be so cruel? Brenda sobbed, her voice rising. We're your parents. We're in trouble. You were in trouble when you decided your pride was more important than your son, Olivia said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet but laced with steel. You're not the victims here, my father's head snapped up. You stay out of this. This is a family matter. I am his family, Olivia retorted, her eyes flashing. I was his family when he was sick and had no one to call. I was his family when he graduated and had no one in the stands. I was his family when we signed the mortgage on our home. You are the people who abandoned him. There's a difference. That silenced them. They had no response to her fierce, unwavering truth. I looked back at them, the 3 architects of my lonely childhood. I felt a finality settle over me, a sense of a chapter closing for good. So, here is my decision, I announced. It is final. You are not moving into my house. You are not welcome in my home. Today is the last day I will ever speak to any of you. The relationship, such as it was, is over. You gave up the right to be my family 18 years ago on a porch with a trash bag. The explosion was immediate and predictable. You ungrateful brat, my father roared, slamming his fist on the table, making the coffees jump. After everything we did for you, the food you ate, the clothes you wore. Look at you, Kevin sneered, his voice thick with venom. Mr. Big Shot in your fancy house. You always thought you were better than us, didn't you? Well, enjoy your empty, perfect life. My mother just wept, her shoulders shaking. What will we do? Where will we go? I stood up, and Olivia stood with me. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I laid it gently on the table in front of my father. He stared at it, confused. What's this? It's your $12 back, I said calmly. With interest, now we're even. I took Olivia's hand, and we turned and walked away. Their shouting followed us, a chorus of rage and self-pity, but it sounded distant, like noise from a television in another room. We didn't look back. We pushed through the door of the daily grind and stepped out into the clean, bright sunlight. The air had never felt so fresh. The drive home was quiet. Olivia drove, her hand resting on my knee, a silent gesture of solidarity. I stared out the passenger window, watching the unremarkable landscape of Middleton give way to the greener, more familiar roads leading to our home. I had expected to feel a storm of emotions, anger, sadness, maybe even a lingering shred of guilt. Instead, I felt light. A great, heavy weight I hadn't even been fully aware I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't the triumphant joy of revenge. It was something deeper, calmer. It was the quiet, profound satisfaction of closure. When we pulled into our driveway, I looked at our house as if seeing it for the first time. The strong, clean lines I had designed, the warm cedar siding, the large windows that seemed to drink in the afternoon light. It wasn't just a structure of wood and glass. It was our sanctuary, and I had successfully defended it. We walked inside, and the peace of the space enveloped us. The silence was no longer heavy or threatening, it was our silence, earned and cherished. I realized that my brother Kevin had been wrong. My life wasn't empty, it was full. It was full of Olivia's love, full of the pride of my work, full of the peace I had fought so hard to find. My family wasn't the one I had left behind in that coffee shop. My family was the woman standing beside me, and the life we had built together from the ground up. Looking back, I understood something fundamental. I didn't succeed in spite of what they did to me. In a strange, painful way, I succeeded because of it. By casting me out, they gave me the one gift they never intended: freedom. The freedom to fail, the freedom to learn, and the freedom to define myself on my own terms, far from the shadows of their expectations and disappointments. They thought they were throwing me to the wolves, but they only taught me how to survive on my own. That chapter of my life is now, finally, closed. The door is locked, and I don't need the key anymore. My past is no longer a ghost that haunts me. It's just a story about a boy who was given a trash bag and $12 and somehow managed to build a castle. So, people of YouTube, what would you have done? Was I wrong to close the door on them for good, or was it the only way to protect the life I fought so hard to build? Let me know in the comments. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.